Peace everyone, Unmask here, and today I'll be showing you how to color fur and feathers. I'll be coloring this kitten and bird to give you some simple tips on approaching these two types of textures using colored pencils. On the left side of the screen you'll see the color palette I'm using. The numbers correspond to both luminance and polychromos colored pencils, and I'm coloring on Stonehenge vellum paper. Also, if you'd like to watch the 3-hour real-time drawing of this tutorial, you can find that over on my Patreon page. Not only will you have access to this tutorial, but over 100 hours of previously recorded tutorials, and new tutorials are live streamed every Friday. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that I do is sketch out my drawing and then gently erase the lines so I'm left with just a subtle ghost outline. The next thing I like to do is start on the prominent facial features like the eyes and the nose, because getting those in the correct location is really important for getting the likeness of the animal. After that, I start outlining the overall flow and texture of the under layers of the fur using the 077 color, and then I go back through with some of the 009 and the 407 to get some of the color variation and value differences. Two of the most important things when coloring fur is getting the correct length of your pencil strokes along with the overall flow and direction. If you break up the smooth flow of your overall pencil direction, you're going to end up creating a more rough looking, disheveled fur texture. And although that might be what you're looking for in some specific animals, however, that's not necessarily the case most of the time with the short-haired animals. So make sure that when you're coloring in your fur, you're doing it with very smooth, consistent directions, that you're not changing the overall flow and direction of your lines too drastically. Otherwise, you'll get that more rough textured fur. The next thing that I do is I use paint thinner to blend it out, and similar to the way that I am moving my pencil, I move my brush to make sure that the fur is all being blended in the right direction. After that, I go back over it with multiple layers using the 093, the 069, adding some of the other color variations with the 836, adding a bit more orange and red depending on where I want the fur and how I want it to be colored. It's very important to get in there with your more contrasted colors as well, just to make sure that you get all the values. After I finish on the head, I start on the chest and front legs of the cat, and this part of the cat is very white. However, I try to emphasize a lot, anytime I face white fur and I'm doing a tutorial, I always try to emphasize how non-white this part of the fur is. In comparison to the paper surrounding it that is actually white, you can see that the fur is turning more gray. There's a bit of brown in there as well. And for the most part, the colors I'm using is the 842, the 846. I also incorporate a little bit of the 077 and the 407 just to get some of the texture and the identifying spots of the fur in there, help build up some of the values, and then of course I use the paint thinner and a round brush to blend it all out, making sure that all of my brush strokes again are in the direction that the fur is growing. This part of the fur is a little bit rougher from the fur that you see on the face, so you can kind of see how the direction changes a bit drastically in some areas where the fur starts to bunch up. The next thing that I work on is the back body and the tail. For this drawing in particularly, I wanted more of the focus on the face of the cat and on the bird and that interaction between the two animals. So for the most part, I didn't put as much detail into the back part of the cat because I wanted it to appear a little out of focus and not as finely detailed. That helps draw more attention towards the cat's face and the bird. What I focused mainly on was just getting the colors correct and put in the right spot. And then of course, again, I still do pay attention to the direction that the fur is going, and when I blend it out with my paint thinner, I also maintain that directional brush stroke in order to keep the fur texture, even though I didn't add as much fur texture in the back part of the cat as I did the face. The other thing that is also sometimes a struggle with is working with paws, and I didn't do a lot of detail on the paws of this cat, but one of the things that I will mention is that when you're doing paws, it's more important to focus on the awkward shapes that you see in your reference photo, as opposed to trying to draw and color exactly what you think a paw might look like. So the paws can be a little bit tricky, but try to draw exactly what you see in your reference photo as opposed to trying to draw what you think a paw looks like. Now I am moving on to the bird, and I missed the beginning part of the chest of the bird. However, one of the distinguishing features of coloring bird feathers that I want to make clear that's different from doing other types of fur is that is just the way the feathers lay on the bird. The feathers have a very linear pattern from where they grow, as opposed to fur that is kind of scattered about randomly. And also, feathers have a very unique structure to them where they have a single centerpiece with a bunch of little furs growing out. And when you have that overlapping pattern of two feathers, what you end up getting is actually crisscross or a hatch pattern. And when I'm drawing the chest feathers of the bird, I pay attention to the fact that a lot of these lines are actually crossing over one another. It is that cross-hatching pattern that creates that subtle feather texture. Now, I don't go through and harshly draw those cross-hatching patterns, but when I'm creating the texture of the feathers, the final layers, I use the cross-hatch pattern to reinforce that texture of the feathers overlapping one another. The last thing that I do with this drawing is add in the drop shadow from the bird, and I just use the colors from the color palette and use the lighter colors around the edge to blend it into the paper softly, and then I use the paint thinner to blend all that out. Alright everyone, here's the finished drawing. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. Remember, if you want to see the real-time tutorial, you can find that along with the reference photo over on my Patreon page, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.